Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, I thought that I would give y'all my five predictions for UFC 259. Guys, this is going to be a great card. This is going to be a fantastic card. I cannot wait for this. At least it has the potential of being great. I hope we actually get to see some great fights and not just some one-sided fights. I've been a little bit on a losing streak in fighting lately. I got Miguel Berchelt versus Oscar Valdez wrong. I got Curtis Blades versus Derek Lewis wrong. I actually got Cyril Gane versus Rosenstreich right. So maybe you could technically say I'm on a winning streak, but not a very long one. So it is what it is. Anyway, we're going to predict these five fights on the main card, man. Should be very interesting. Also, Dominic Cruz, I believe, returns on the prelims, which is very interesting. And we'll see how he returns because Dominic Cruz, in my opinion, is the best 135 pounder of all time. In my opinion, he's a top 10 UFC fighter of all time, at least top 15. And when it comes down to the overall, I think that he just really hasn't been the same fighter ever since about that 3 year layoff, probably even more. So it is what it is, and we'll have to see. Or maybe Henry Cejudo was just that good. I don't know. I do think he did take advantage of some of Dominic's weaknesses that were not exposed by many of the fighters before him, but it is what it is. We'll see what happens, but I predict Dominic Cruz to win that one. But anyway, so let's get into this one. Tiago Santos versus Alexander Raykick, I believe is his name. If I'm wrong about the pronunciation, then correct me. Anyway, when it comes down to it, this is a very interesting fight. You have a person who's kind of at a crossroads right now versus a person who's on the come up, which a lot of these fights end up being. So, it's very interesting. Thiago Santos is on a 2-fight losing streak right now. He had a very, very competitive fight against John Jones, where I believe he actually tore muscles in both of his legs. Might have even been like torn ACLs, which I couldn't believe when I heard it, but that might have been it. I can't remember. You would think that if someone had two torn ACLs, they wouldn't be able to walk, but I swear to God, that's what ESPN reported, but I can't remember. Anyway, when it comes down to the overall bottom line is this. I actually thought Thiago Santos could have won that John Jones fight. That was a very competitive fight. I thought John Jones was actually a little bit too tentative to throw punches. I thought that he was a little bit too afraid of Thiago Santos' power and that he actually wasn't throwing enough. I thought Santos actually pulled out that fight. Although you could argue John Jones pulled it out, but I thought at the end of the day, Santos actually just pulled it out at the end of the day. And there was a bunch of people also arguing that Dominic Reyes pulled out the fight against John Jones. I never seen Reyes beating John Jones. I thought maybe he pulled out 2 rounds and then kind of slowed down after round 2. But Santos, you could have a pretty decent argument overall that he might have pulled out that fight. But anyway, after that, it pretty much all came crashing down because he lost against Glover Teixeira in a pretty dominant fashion. So right now he's kind of at a crossroads, and I believe he is up there in age. I believe he's like 37 or something like that. So, he's got to get back on the winning trail soon. So we'll see what happens. Then there's this upcomer Alexander Raykick that looked very impressive as of late. Had a very good, I believe, knockout over Anthony Smith, who was one of the top contenders at 205 for quite a while, the light heavyweight division, of course. So very interesting fight. Once again, crossroads versus on the come up. So who's going to win this fight and why? I believe Raykick is actually going to take this fight. If I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, once again, correct me. I'm sorry about that. But I believe that the European is going to win this fight. I believe he's going to win this fight because personally, I believe that he's the more complete fighter. When I saw him in the last fight, I actually was not overly impressed with him. But when I seen a couple of his fights today, because I did some research overall to kind of dignify a response and overall, try to get some information in there so I can make my picks. I actually was decently impressed with the guy. I thought overall that he has a well-balanced striking game, very lengthy, very tall, long reach. I believe he has like what is his reach again? Thiago Santos has a 76-inch reach. I think this kid has a 78-inch reach. If I'm wrong about that, then correct me. But anyways, when it comes to something like that, either way, very interesting fight. Both kind of prefer to strike, but one thing I noticed about the European is that he overall would take it to the ground and in the clinch if he needs to. And Thiago Santos, now this was against a very, very good jiu-jitsu practitioner in Glover Teixeira. But he does have a little bit of a weakness in the clinch and in the ground game. Thiago Santos does. So It's going to be interesting, but I'm going with Raykick in this fight. I believe he's going to win by unanimous decision. We'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up in knockout with either gentleman, so we'll see what happens. By the way, this fight card, 4 out of 5 of these main fights, I believe, are 50-50 fights. There's only one on here that I believe is not 50-50, and we might already know what that is already, if you know, even with me not saying it, but we'll get into that later. So I'm going to go with Raykick on this one. I'm going to go with Alexander Raykick. I'm going to go with Alexander Raykick by unanimous decision. And we'll see what happens. So that's my pick, and I'm sticking to it. Pick one in. All right, so let's go to pick 2. Who do I think is going to win between Islam Makhachev? I believe is how you say it. If I'm wrong, once again, correct me. I believe he's Russian. And you also have this fighter who is actually from my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska, Drew Dober. Very, very interesting fight. This is another one of those 50-50 fights. Well, one thing I noticed off the bat from watching both of these guys, this is a wrestler versus striker type of matchup. Drew Dober is a very interesting striker, very powerful. Both of them are southpaws. Let's keep that in mind. Islam overall, the Russian, I believe, he certainly can strike, but that doesn't seem to be usually his bread and butter. His bread and butter is usually wrestling and getting in the clinch. So that's going to be a very interesting fight right there. Wrestlers versus strikers are always very interesting matchups. So it's going to be very, very interesting. I think that the Russian overall, I think that maybe he might try to strike with them in the first minute of the fight. Then he might get hit with something. He might say, oh, well, damn, I don't want to strike with this guy anymore. Let's try to get this guy in the clinch and on the ground. I think basically that's what's going to happen, and I think basically he's going to control the fight from there. So I'm going to go with Islam. I'm going to go with the Russian overall by unanimous decision. That's what I'm going to go with, and that is my second pick that is in. We'll see if I'm right. Anyways, so that's a very tough fight. Because I don't think he wants to. I think this is a 50-50 fight, and I don't think he wants to strike with Drew Dober. Drew Dober does have one punch knockout power, but he is a little bit vulnerable in the clinch and on the ground. So we'll see what happens. This next fight, Petr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. Guys, god damn it. This is another one to where I just really don't know who to predict on this one, man. This is another one of those fights that's just very, very hard. Petr Yan, I was actually very impressed with him from the moment that I saw him. I noticed that he had very good wrestling, decent ground game, decent clinch, decent striking too. He's very, very accurate. Very, very pristine and very accurate. Very powerful as well. Very powerful. Aljamain Sterling, I never was overly impressed with him when I first started watching, but you have to be impressed with what he's done lately with wins over Corey Sandhagen and Jimmy Rivera and Pedro Munoz and all those guys. He certainly has impressed as of lately. You know, he's waited a while for his title shot. He certainly deserves it now. So, oh boy. So, who to predict in this one? Man, it's so hard. You know, I almost said Pedro Munoz, my bad. Petr Yan, I'm going to go with Petr Yan in this fight. And the reason why I'm going to go with Petr Yan overall is because I do believe, at least by a small margin, that he could be the more complete fighter than Aljamain Sterling. And that sounds to some people like an insane statement. And there's a certain amount of people overall that do not believe in Petr Yan, that don't believe that he's that elite of a fighter. He is an A-class fighter, make no mistake about it. This is a A-plus title fight. This is an excellent title fight, 50-50. I do believe that going in, Aljamain Sterling will most likely be favored, but I'm going to go with Petr Yan. I believe that he breaks him down. I believe he's going to outstrike him. I would not be surprised if Aljamain Sterling won this fight. He does seem to be the faster striker, but they both do seem to be good in the clinch and wrestling. And, you know, but I do think Petr Yan's actually better in that category, believe it or not. Now, a certain amount of people might disagree, but Petr Yan, I think, is an excellent wrestler. I think he's an excellent wrestler. I think he's got excellent technique on the ground. I just think that overall he prefers to strike, and he's very powerful. I don't think that it's impossible to hit Aljamain Sterling, and overall, I don't think it's impossible to hurt him. So I'm going to go with Petr Yan in this one. I would not be surprised whoever wins this fight, but we'll see what happens. I'm going to go with Petr Yan. I'm going to go with 4th round stoppage. That's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with 4th round knockout. We'll see what happens. Also, would not be surprised with an early knockout. So we'll see what happens by either gentleman. Very tough fight to predict, man. But I'm going with Petr Yan. Very risky pick. It'd be a risky pick either way, but I'm going with Petr Yan. So this next fight, the only fight in my opinion that is not a 50-50 fight, the Amanda Nunez versus Meegan Anderson fight. Okay, so who do I think is going to win this fight? I think it's going to be Amanda Nunez. And I think about 99.9% of the world thinks it's also going to be Amanda Nunez. Amanda Nunez is the most dominant woman fighter that I've ever seen personally, at least in the UFC. And when it comes down to the overall, man, she's just skilled in pretty much every area. Amanda Nunez does have some faults. Sometimes I think that she needs to cover up a little bit more. Sometimes I think she winds up her punches a little bit too much and leaves herself open for incoming punches. But other than that, there's just not a whole lot of weaknesses that she has. She's great overall in striking almost in every way. She has a very solid chin. She's very good at jiu-jitsu, very good on the ground. She can compete with anyone and anywhere. It's very hard to go against Amanda. And on top of that, she has A-grade power. She might be the most powerful woman puncher, at least in the UFC's history, that I personally ever seen. Even more powerful than a Chris Cyborg. That's saying a lot. So it is what it is. Meegan Anderson, now the thing that she brings to the table that's interesting to me, and this is the reason why I wanted this fight to happen, even though I'm not giving Meegan Anderson that much of a chance, what I'll say is this, and this might be a little bit high, but I'm going to give Meegan Anderson at least a 20% chance here. And some people might say overall that that's still low or that that's a little bit too high, depending on your view. But when it comes down to it, the reason why I give her at least a 20% chance, she's 6 foot tall. And she does have a little bit of a reach advantage. If this does go to the ground, lengthier opponents do tend to give smaller opponents trouble. So we'll see what happens. Now, that's not always the case, but we'll see what happens. You can actually argue that Amanda Nunez is better on the ground than Meegan Anderson. Because Meegan Anderson, what I'll say is this. Meegan Anderson is not A-grade on the ground, but she is pretty decent on the ground. Let's not forget also, I do believe that she got submitted against Felicia Spencer not too long ago. Now, that would be fight math, and we can't always go by that. But when it comes down to the overall, you certainly could look at it. It is what it is. Anyway, when it comes down to it, I'm going to go with Amanda Nunez by first or second round knockout. That's my prediction. We'll see what happens. Amanda she only really just has one or two weaknesses. And other than that, she's just so complete. She has a good chin, good power, good speed, good striking, good ground game, good clinch, good everything. And she can knock your ass into tomorrow or into next week with just one solid punch. And Meegan Anderson, I just think is a little bit too straightforward. I think she gets hit a little bit too often. And I don't think, even with her length, I don't think that she can give Amanda Nunez as much problems as she needs to try and submit her, which is really, in my opinion, the only chance that she has, because she will most likely not outstrike Amanda. She does not have the striking skills to beat Amanda in that department. So it is what it is. So that is the fourth pick in. Let's go to the fifth and final pick, ladies and gentlemen. Jan Blackovich versus Israeli Sonia. I cannot tell you how excited I am for this fight. I hope it doesn't end up being a dud. I hope that it's a very, good fight, but we'll see what happens. This is a very interesting fight, man. Once again, almost all these fights are 50-50 fights, and I include this one. I see a lot of people going with Israeli Sonia on this one, and I think it's because a certain amount of people actually don't like him, so they're kind of saying, well, he's going to win anyways. I don't even want to watch it because Jan Blackovich is just no competition. I think a lot of people are actually going that route. I think because, and I always make it a preface that I'm not a fan of any of these athletes overall. Now, I am a fan of entertainment, of sports, but I try not to be a fan of any of these, particular athletes. That way it doesn't, cloud my judgment when it comes to judging them and overall giving you guys my predictions and analysis. But when it comes down to it, I think a certain amount of people do hate Israel Adesanya to the point to where they're like, well, I don't even want to watch it. Because, I have been a fan of certain athletes in the past when I was younger, when I was in more of my fanboy stage. Now that I've grown out of it now, I'm not necessarily like that. But, when you're younger in your teenage years or something like that, when it comes down to it, when you hate an athlete or something like that, you say, say you were watching football and you were watching, Like take example for the Patriots versus the Eagles in that Super Bowl that happened a few years ago. If you hated Tom Brady, absolutely hated him, didn't like watching him at all, you're an Aaron Rodgers fan, whatever it is. If you saw that Eagles Super Bowl, or overall not saw it, but if you were going into that matchup, you were saying, I don't even want to watch that Super Bowl because the Eagles, they don't even have Carson Wentz. That it's not even going to be a challenge. Tom Brady's going to win. It's going to be super easy. Well, of course, come to turn out, the Eagles actually won that Super Bowl even without Carson Wentz. But when it comes down to it, that's basically the haters' mindset. And I think a certain amount of people are actually counting Jan Blackovich out because they don't like Israel. And I think to a lot of people, that's not going to make sense. But you overall actually had to have, at one point in time, had to have been a fan or a hater or somebody to understand that mindset. And I think we all are, at least at one point in time. But when it comes down to who do I think is going to win this fight and why, I am going to go with Israeli Sonia. But I would not be surprised if Jan Blackovich pulled out of this fight. I would not be surprised at all. Last fight, when I went against Jan Blackovich, against Dominic Reyes, I predicted Dominic Reyes to win that fight. I can't remember who the main event was because I think that was the co-main event. But I think it was Israel Adesanya versus Paulo Costa. I think I got one fight right because I predicted Israel Adesanya to completely decimate Paulo Costa because I could see that. Let me tell you something. Paulo Costa is not the fighter that Jan Blackovich is. Paulo Costa, actually, when you take a look at him, is a very one-dimensional fighter. And that's not to diminish Israel Adesanya's performance because I think he's beaten fighters that are better than Paulo Costa, like a Robert Whittaker, maybe even a Yoel Romero, even though Paulo Costa recently did beat Yoel Romero. But Romero actually does have more dimensions than Paulo Costa. I just think he didn't throw enough in that fight. And on top of that, he has gotten a little bit older. So it is what it is. But Paulo Costa was still an A-grade win. But this is an even bigger win. This might be the biggest win of Israel Adesanya's career if he can get this win. Not only will he become a 2-division champion, which is a very big significance in the UFC, not necessarily the same as it is in boxing. Meaning that boxing, I'm not going to say it's almost nothing to become a 2-weight division champion, but it's a certain amount easier to become a 2-weight division champion in boxing than it is in UFC. We all know that because of the amount of belts and all that other stuff. When it comes down to it, man, would not be surprised whatsoever Jan Blackovich pulled out of this. I bet against him in the Dominic Reyes fight, and he didn't just beat Dominic Reyes, he knocked that dude out. He dominated him. He hit him overall with a bunch of kicks in the first round that made it look like he basically was chopping his body in half in that first round. He was very accurate. He overall was just very powerful, even way more powerful than I even thought he could be, man. He's so powerful. Like, he's got to be the hardest hitting light heavyweight that I've seen within a certain amount of years. And that's saying something because you've had Ozdemir, you've had, what's that dude's name? Maybe not more powerful than Anthony Johnson, but he might even hold a cake to Anthony Johnson, or hold a candle to Anthony Johnson. There's another punch that I'm forgetting too. I just can't remember. Thiago Santos, the guy who's fighting on this card. Tiago Santos actually beat Jan Blackovich, and a certain amount of other people did, and a certain amount of people are looking at his past, and they're saying, well, Israel Adesanya is going to beat Jan Blackovich because this guy beat him, this guy beat him, this guy beat him, this guy beat him. There's a saying where it says your past doesn't define who you are. And I don't always agree with that sentiment. I think to a degree that it does. Even in the fight game, I think sometimes it will. But there are certain fighters that do evolve, especially in MMA and UFC, especially we see this. There are certain fighters that will adapt after a while and will increase their skill set and become better fighters. Once upon a time, Corey Anderson completely dominated Jan Blackovich. In the rematch, Jan Blackovich knocked him out in round 1. So I don't think Jan Blackovich is the same fighter anymore, ladies and gentlemen. That's the bottom line. That's the theory that I have. So when it comes down to it, I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya. I believe that he's probably going to outreach him from the outside. I believe that he's going to go after his legs. I believe that most likely he's going to try to stay at a safe distance from the outside and peck him apart. And he does have a great power. Israel Adesanya does have very good power. But do not, I repeat, do not underestimate Jan Blackovich. This is a 50-50 fight, at least a 60-40. I do think that it goes in the advantage of Israel Adesanya. But Jan Blackovich is a stud. There is no doubt about it. Jan Blackovich is probably debatably the most powerful hitter at 205 pounds that I've recently seen within at least the past 5 years when it comes down to it. If not him, then maybe Anthony Johnson, but it's close. So it is what it is. But because he can knock you out with one shot, and it is not impossible to hurt Israel Adesanya. I believe they're going to have a similar reach. He is going to be heavier and bigger than Israel Adesanya. I do believe in certain areas Israel is more skilled than Jan Blackovich, but the skill set I do not believe is as big of a differential as many people are trying to make it out to be. I think a lot of people are counting Jan Blackovich out because they just want Israel to lose so bad and they don't see the potential of that happening with Jan Blackovich. But we'll see what happens. When it comes down to it, I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya by unanimous decision. We'll see what happens. Would I be surprised whatsoever if Jan Blackovich knocked Israel Adesanya out, which is most likely the way he would win, or beat him? No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So don't count this man out. Ladies and gentlemen, those are my predictions. That is the fifth and final prediction that I'm going to put in there. I cannot wait for this card. I believe I'll be watching it next week at Buffalo Wild Wings or at some sports bar with a friend or two. So I'm very, very excited, man. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you guys' predictions are, who you think is going to win and why. Are you excited for this card? Hopefully you are. Sorry I haven't been posting as much lately, but I promise it'll get there soon. Anyways, guys, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to go with Raykick. I'm going to go with Makhachev. I'm going to go with Petr Yan. I'm going to go with Nunez. I'm going to go with Adesanya. Those are my 5 predictions. We'll see what happens. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys overall for the recent support. Those of you guys that have subscribed and reviewed my videos, I appreciate it very much. And that's all I got for now. If you enjoy the content, click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. Would appreciate that very much. And we'll see what happens next Saturday, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.